Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artist Index. And as per usual, I'm going to have the guest introduce themselves, say their name, part of the introduction, and spell their name. And we'll take it from there.
Okay, my name is Carolyn Walega. I was born Carolyn Strules, and I was Carolyn Dlouhy for a number of years. So Carolyn, Carolyn, Walega, Walega.
Okay, so I'm assuming with a name like Carolyn, you probably get people who try to drop the Y and just INE, right, for the end.
Oh, yeah.
Caroline or
Caroline.
Anything.
Carol.
Yeah. Now with the other three last names that you had, Strules, Louis, and
Walega.
Have you had any occurrences with that? Because I always ask, because this is part of like the, we're just trying to chill out over here and take a deep breath and get going. And sometimes there's some really good stories.
Sure. Well, none of my names are easy to spell. Mm-hmm. So Walega, people say Walega a lot. And Strules, it's spelled Strules. And Dlouhy is always massacred. It's spelled Dlouhy. People put a G in it, or an apostrophe, or an E, or
Lui. Well, Ludei or Dilui, or I mean, it just goes all over the place, right?
Delui, yes, it's yeah. Dlouhy.
So you more than likely may be interviewed again. I'm going to tell you that from the get-go. Don Wilkinson, this is sort of like a preemptive commercial for him. Don Wilkinson is going to be hosting our new podcast series that will partner with this one called Push and Pull, and it will focus only on Swaineys. And it's a long time coming. It has to be done because everybody's getting older. And the Swain School definitely was a major cog in the clock or one of the legs on the stool or whatever. It was a major component of what has created the creative community here in the South Coast of Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about yourself, from the very beginning.
The very beginning. Oh my goodness. Well, I was an artist from childhood, as everyone says. My earliest memory is it was Sunday school, and they'd given us a mimeograph picture of Christ that I colored not in the lines, just everywhere with one green crayon, the green Christ, like Gauguin. And I brought it with me out of Sunday school. My grandfather, my papu, said, "Bravo, Kula." And I remember thinking, he must think that's all I can do or something. It was just one of those things that actually I had to look it up. It's kind of a cognitive process where kids color outside of the lines until a certain age and that sort of thing. And on from there. Kindergarten, again, a mimeograph yellow duck that we had to color, and the kindergarten teacher said, color the duck yellow. Do not use your orange or black crayon to color the eye or the feet until you're done with this part. And I wanted to see what the duck would look like with an eye, so I did it in the wrong order and got scolded for doing that. And then first grade, the art teacher came to school, and she went to the chalkboard, the slate blackboard, and she drew a profile of the little girl sitting next to me. And we had to draw a profile of the person sitting next to us. So I drew the profile of Joanne Pikilniak in the first grade. And everyone in the class, my classmates, said, "Oh, yours is better than the art teacher's." So that was the beginning of realizing that this was something that I was interested in. And art contest in the second grade, I was disqualified because they thought that I cut out the page from the coloring book, but I had actually drawn it. And then they decided to, give me the prize. And on from there, one teacher told the next, and I was in charge of the bulletin board throughout grammar school. Junior high, we had the teachers chose their best art student from each class and provided a program where every week an artist or artisan from different disciplines came and demonstrated for us. And at the end of so many weeks, 10 or 12 weeks, they took us on a field trip to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And by the way, around 9 years old, I started Saturday and summer classes at Swain. And high school, I was always drawing, my classmates, what have you. And I was still taking classes at Swain. In fact, there's an interesting little vignette that happened where I'm maybe 14 and Sig Haynes is he's a few years older than me. And he walked into the classroom. We were painting in oil, and we had a model with a flag behind her and clothed model. Anyway, so Sig opens the door, he looks in the room and he sees that we're working in oil, put his hand on his hip and he said, "I can't believe this. I had to wait until I was 16 to paint in oils," which was, something I never forgot. He, obviously he really wanted to paint. So did I, but anyhow, from that group.
Was that from when he was born in Norway, wasn't he?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. But he was here. In fact, he once said to me that he and I are the people who go back the furthest from Swain, because we started as children.
Okay.
And then while I was in high school, I was preparing to go to art school. I took private lessons from one of my instructors from Swain, who was a Swain student. I think he was a student at Swain while I was taking classes there. But then afterwards, he was a Swain grad, Bill Metcalf. And he helped me get my portfolio together. Some of my classmates from school came and modeled for me in his studio, which was on Arnold Street. It was upstairs from a sculptor, a woman sculptor from Westport. Her name was Lydie Collins. I don't know if you've heard of her.
On Arnold Street. I lived on the backside on East Clinton, between Park and Chancery. So where was that studio?
It was a couple of doors up from not one, but maybe two or more doors up from County Street.
Okay, so okay.
On the
right hand side, it looks like a carriage house across from the Roosevelt apartment.
Across from it, on the south side of Arnold.
Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I know exactly where that is. Yeah.
And then, it was time to apply to art school. My instructor, M.F.A, suggested I go to Swain. But at the time, Swain wasn't accredited, and my parents wanted me to go to a school where I'd get a degree. So I went to the museum school for the first year, foundation year.
What year was that?
It was, I graduated high school in 1967, so that was September of 67 through 68.
Okay.
And then, after the foundation year, I transferred to Swain and studied with David Loeffler Smith. One thing I did want to mention, while I was at the museum school, one of my instructors, my painting instructor, was Lux T. Feininger, who's the son of Lionel Feininger from the Bauhaus and the, I'm trying to think if it was the Blue Rider group. But anyway, he was, he and his father both were at the Bauhaus alongside Paul Klee. And
I don't remember him. I was there the summer of 1971. I was accepted to the Boston Museum School of Fine Arts, or the School of Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. That's the name. And we went there for like a preparatory thing to get us ready. And also, I think it was to some sort of an analysis for scholarship. And it was like a whopping, $4,000 or something. And I couldn't attend. So I ended up at SMU, which was all 4 years for $2,400. But I don't, the only person I remember, not by name, was the sculpture teacher. I'll still never forget that exercise that we did. But
what was the exercise?
We had to break up into teams and create a sculpture, a huge sculpture out of cardboard and tape that we could run through the hallways of the school from I think the basement level all the way on up to the top, and there's like a course and for a record time. And then by some sort of form of lottery, our sculpture now would be taken over by another team, as our team would take someone else's sculpture. So the idea was to create something that we could run through space very, very quickly, be totally aware of our environment, and totally befuddle anybody else trying to do the same thing. It was a phenomenal exercise.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Could it have been Court Bennett?
Jeez, it's a blank. It's a blank.
Yeah.
I remember things like going to the Yellow Submarine to get a sandwich and a pack of chips and a Coke or Pepsi, actually. Right. But weird thing, and I remember I smoked Lark cigarettes at the time, but the instructors for some reason are a complete blank. So, but it would have been a great education, obviously,
Now, was that sculpture class in the museum or in the museum school?
The museum school. In the museum school.
Yeah. Only reason I asked that, when I was at the museum school, our sculpture class was on the top floor of the museum. That and the art history class was in the auditorium.
Yeah.
In fact, the art history instructor, his name was Cecil Wilde, and he, in one of his art history lectures, he talked about New Bedford as the place where the State Theater was a place where you could see certain kinds of films that he was recommending that, we take in. And later his wife, Sally Wilde, was an artist in the area as well.
Oh, wow. This is great. This is great history. Before you go further, I want to, before I forget, the Swain Saturdays, I bumped into so many people who did not eventually go on to Swain or even go into art, but they have like these warm and cuddly, fuzzy, warm memories of the Saturday classes, and it stuck with them all of their lives. that it was that impactful?
Well, it was for me. I loved going there. I remember a couple of things. At first they kind of just let you do whatever you wanted to do. It was on bond paper with an ink fountain pen and watercolor. In fact, I have a triptych I did at age 10 of Lulu and Tubby, copied from the cartoons. But anyway, I remember one of the instructors, and I don't know if it was Ron Kowalski. I know he was a significant instructor there before I arrived at Swain. So it would have been while I was a child in the Saturday classes. But we were doing a still life, and he came over, and it was in pastel, I believe, and he drew on my picture. And of course, what he did looked a lot better than what I was doing. So that was kind of interesting. But anyway, kind of a no-no these days as far as art education.
All right, I want to go back to you. Your I thought you were leading me down the path when you said that you had a mimeograph, drawing a coloring page of Jesus. I thought you had gone to parochial school, and I thought, she paid dearly for this. And then it obviously did this weird kind of a twisted turn. And then you were more traumatized by the yellow duck than you were by the green Jesus. And it made me think, because I've interviewed Jane Ferris Richardson, who's an art therapist, and I had, as an instructor, the experience of what I call wounded birds, or birds with broken wings, people who, as children, love to do art and so on and so forth, and somebody just squashed them. I mean, so they came back as adults to see if they could relive that, if they were any good. It was just kind of interesting. And I never put the two and two together of, oh my God, there is such a thing called art trauma, which requires art therapy.
Interesting.
I'm going to talk to Jane about that.
Well, it was also the response I got from what I did on the mimeograph page. Mm-hmm. My grandfather thought it was wonderful, or at least he wanted me to think it was wonderful. And my kindergarten teacher wanted to make sure that I followed the rules, the directions. And that it was their response that kind of had the lingering effect.
Yeah.
So anyway, Swain, as you know, David Smith studied with Hans Hofmann, and some others. I forget the artist's name, but his last name is Hurst, and also Raphael Sawyer. His father, Loeffler Smith's father, was also an artist who he studied with, and of course, was influenced by as a parent. And I remember David talking about how he and his father had this thing called backing into art history, where they would kind of take something from art history and, tie it into their work. Not necessarily looking at the cutting edge, but looking back at some of the roots of art and bringing it into their work. And of course, he did that, with mythology, and his work evolved from figurative to very abstract. But he'd also always start with a subject, an objective subject. And then my son was born in my first year at Swain. So I was kind of occupied, when I wasn't in school. The first job that I got I remember someone saying to me, "What can you do? You're an artist." And so when I was looking for a job, I found this job with Model Cities where they were looking for an artist. And I got to color maps of different areas that were designated to be improved. And after a while, there was also another artist, student artist like me, Peggy Conley, who I was working with. And after the need for these maps, kind of was exhausted, they were looking for assignments for us, and we put our heads together. We wanted to figure out another way we could get paid to do art. And so we wrote a proposal. It was called The Summer of 1971. And it was about the West End in New Bedford. It was kind of it was a year or two after some volatile incidents in the area.
There was the Kempton Street riots.
Right. And so we in the proposal, we recommended that since these buildings that we were talking about were going to be torn down, and it was going to be a demolition, we thought, what an opportunity to put some art somewhere to kind of heal the situation. And so we proposed that we do a mural. And our advisors, it was Gloria Clark at the time, advised that we speak to people in the community and see what they thought about our idea. So we wanted to do these murals, and we wanted to purchase some garbage cans for the area that the children in the area could then paint the garbage cans, and we would paint the murals. But they as much as we were surprised, they approved our proposal. And, it had a very minimal budget. The only thing was they didn't want us to do the painting of the murals because of where it was. They wanted someone who lived in the...
And it was a color issue. I mean, I think pretty plain and simple, but not in a negative sense.
Right.
Right. And I don't want to forget this thought. You guys were way ahead of your time, weren't you?
We were. In fact, I think Richard mentioned to you that he thought it was the first mural in the area, first public art.
Right. I'd love to get some documentation on that. And I think I've actually seen, was it near a storefront on Kempton?
Yes.
In fact, was it close to the Black Panthers headquarters?
Well, it was the Black Panthers.
It wasn't? Okay.
And we were required to go talk to the Black Panthers about the project. And they were not too excited about it in the beginning.
Kind of drop-jawed, I guess, about this.
Yeah, but it worked out. But, it was more challenging than I had expected it to be. And so the murals were, by the way, of Malcolm X, Bobby Seale, Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, and I believe it was Muhammad Ali. I think he was Ali by that time.
Do you have documentation, visual documentation, images of these images?
I wish I did. Somebody gave me one photograph, and it was the only one that I knew of that existed. I don't know if anyone who lives in the area ever snapped a picture, and I cannot find the photograph. I can't find the proposal.
Great to bring that back.
Yeah,
I could. One of the organizations in town, like Super Flat or whatever,
right?
Do a recommemoration of this thing, because this is really impactful. Yeah.
I'm going to go back a little bit. Age 10. I'm in the New Bedford Library, public library, and I wandered out of the children's section, and I'm looking in this area, and I find this book that has pictures, and I believe I have racked my brain over this, but I believe the artist's name was Hokusei, but not the Hokusei, the famous one.
The Japanese block printer, yeah.
Right. But it was a story about a man who was an itinerant artist. And he traveled from village to village. And he was on this path, walking along. He sees a beautiful bird. He sees a beautiful tree, a branch on a tree. And finally, after a long time, I'll make it short, he gets to a village. And he has nothing. He has no food. He has no art supplies. And he gets there. And what he does is he uses a broom. He uses the colors from the earth, and he paints a mural. And what is it of? It's of a bird on a branch. And so that was kind of my first exposure to someone doing something like a mural. And also, my parents owned a Cameo Beauty Salon on William Street, 75 William. It was it was there for a long time. It just closed a few years ago. But my father hired an itinerant artist to paint a mural in the beauty salon. And at the time, I was about 12 years old, and I had a ponytail on the top of my head, which I called it tree. And he said he wanted, and my family is Greek, so he painted a Grecian scene. One side of one wall, there was Jacqueline Kennedy. On the other wall, he painted me. But he said, I'm going to come back tonight and do this painting of you, but don't change your hairdo. So, which is kind of appropriate, that it had to do with the hairdo. And so anyway, he painted a mural there. And years later, many years later, the walls desperately needed painting. So I painted a mural in the beauty salon, which was there. I painted it in 85. And it got painted over just recently, last couple of years.
That was only a couple of doors down from Gallery X, wasn't it? I remember the sign. It was a metal sign with, if I remember, with a cameo on it. Cameo. Yeah, it was very distinctive.
It had actually like an Adobe colored awning.
Yeah.
And anyway, that was jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah. I'm going to jump back real quick again, because you were talking about children and coloring outside the lines and everything. And I thought to myself, too,
right.
I think what it is that it helps them isolate the figure. So by coloring around them, dealing with negative space, they create the positive, make the positive space more powerful. But that was just a thought. Go ahead. This has been wonderful. I mean, I'm really excited about. When Richard told me about your involvement with that mural, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this has got to be one of the earliest not just for the city, but across the United States. Because don't forget, every summer was a hot summer. Every summer there was a riot. There was Watts, LA, in LA, Chicago, Detroit. I mean, cities burned. And the problems still haven't been solved. But to do that, to do what you did, why?
Why did we do it?
Why? Yeah.
We wanted to get paid to paint.
And that was it. It's completely pedestrian, completely. I know. Commercial, yeah.
No, I think we did have a sensitivity towards the issues in the area, but we, started with one thought and it kind of evolved. And the whole Model Cities program was kind of oriented towards, researching the people's needs and concerns. So we were in that context. So
part of that urban renewal.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I'd be remiss, I think the artist's name that we found to do the murals was Eddie Cabral.
Eddie Cabral.
And I was going to try to see if maybe he had a photograph of it. But I'm not in contact with him. But
Excellent. That's good information. So
yeah.
There's another part of the story I want to skip ahead to. You and Richard were crushes, so to speak, and then separated and had separate lives, and then came back together. And I mean, that's kind of an interesting. Yeah, okay, it's romantic already. I said it.
Yeah, it is a romantic story. We knew each other in high school. We went out a few times. He told you about our trip to see Archibald MacLeish, a poet I believe we had studied in high school, and we're thrilled to meet him. And we went to a couple of dances together, that sort of thing. And then years later, we both worked for model cities, but not at the same time. When we left high school, we didn't see each other for about 20 years, and we bumped into each other in Baker Books. And the next time was a few years after that. I had an opening at Gallery X. It was Spirit Colored Light with Jane Bergoli and Mildred Smith and myself. And who walks in, not knowing that I'm in the show, but Richard. And, we're glad to see each other, got together with a couple of other staying friends, and, went our separate ways. It was only after 50 years, when we were getting ready for our high school reunion, that we were both available and things took the turns that they did. We got married before the reunion. Wow. Valentine's Day before the reunion.
Yeah, you just never know. Believe me, I know from personal experience. You just don't know where life is going to go.
You never know.
Sometimes it's a hard turn. Sometimes it's a gentle curve or a gentle slope.
Right.
But you where did we go from there? We're in 1971, and we've got the unfortunate, they refer to them as the riots.
Right.
There was a lot of stuff going on in the city. Kenny Pemberton, who was a prize fighter from here. There was just a lot of swirling things going on. It was a time of revolution. There's no other way to pass that. I mean, my 4 years at SMU, I mean, there were student strikes. There was all kinds of stuff going on. There's Vietnam. Right,
exactly. So many things. Well, after the mural project, I really didn't come back to murals for a while, but I did. I was at Swain. A couple of things I wanted to mention that kind of influenced me in some way while I was there, aside from, of course, studying painting with David Smith, which was significant. He was he had a huge impact on my work. But also, he invited a guest speaker to Swain, a conceptual artist, Larry Burgess from Boston. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he did something called Star Pits, which was fascinating. He traveled to, somewhere in South America, I believe, with a group of people, and they went to a certain spot on the earth and dug a hole and put a prism over it, and it allowed them to, I forget how deep they had to dig it, but it to the strata of the earth where the light from a certain star would have been hitting the earth so many years before.
Okay.
So it was fascinating. And later, just to skip forward a second, I invited the same artist when I was in graduate school to come speak to us. But anyway,
And where did you go to graduate school?
UMass Dartmouth. By
So
then,
it was
because I didn't go till later, till it was UMass. But in between Swain, I went to SMU, same
right.
university,
Different name, yeah.
right? And I believe I graduated the same year as you, 1975.
Yes.
I got my B.F.A in art in painting and from Swain, but I had to take academic courses from UMass, from SMU at the time. And then I went just to get accredited to teach. I went to SMU for a few courses. I ended up with a second bachelor's degree. And then I didn't go to graduate school until a little later. In between that, I just want to briefly touch on this. I left the area, traveled around a little bit with a group to start a school. You know, my son was at the age to start school. Mm-hmm. And we found ourselves in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And who do I meet? But a man named Jackie Suazo. He's the foster son of Georgia O'Keeffe. And we were talking to him about possibly helping us with the school. And he said, well, my mother might be able to help. And he talked to her about it. And he said, well, if she's going to get involved, she would have to meet you, meaning me. And so I was pretty excited about it. Never happened, but that was that part of that. And then I came back to the area. I was in Fairhaven, and I became the artist in residence for the town of Fairhaven. It was for about 18 months. I had a studio on the top floor of the beautiful town hall and had all different kinds of projects. There was, remember when Skylab was falling?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
Well, I had a Skylab catcher fabricated that looked kind of like a, I don't even know how to describe it. It was circular and made of metal, and the children who were attended the art fair that the Skylab catcher was present at got to do some artwork that we attached to the Skylab catcher, and to kind of lighten the mood because people thought the sky was falling down.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had an open studio. Also taught a life drawing class to folks at in the Your Theater building mm-hmm. on Maxfield and Purchase, I believe. A number of other projects there. So, yeah, there was a balloon event. We sent off some balloons where kids, kind of like bottles in the sea. These were messages in bottles and little lightweight bottles made of plastic. And they decorated at another event. Anyhow, after my residency, I got a scholarship towards my graduate program. So I went to UMass Dartmouth. At the time, the program instructors were, I think it was headed by Dietmar Winkler. Mm-hmm. Also George Meller, the sculptor who had as a sculpture teacher years before. Also,
he had a profound influence on me, except I didn't realize it until 30, 40 years later.
Really?
Yeah, I just never synced with him, just didn't get him. There was a couple of books that he had for a class that we had that, I don't know, he was just way beyond my I don't know, maturity level or something. And then I've read that book so many times that I've got rubber bands holding it together. It was it was
a book on sculpture.
No, it was a book on art. It was oh my God, The Necessity of Art, a Marxist approach by
Really?
Ernst Fischer.
Really? How interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, well, interesting thing that happened. Anyway, the other instructors were Janet Espo. I'm drawing a blank right now. But anyway, George Miller, you had mentioned him doing a raku firing that you witnessed.
Yes, down when you're looking from the theater building, the auditorium, but you're looking down towards Group 1 to the first level, which is a sub-level. It's a walk-in basement, basically. It was right there at the bottom. You know, there was like a long stairway that went all the way down, and then if you kept walking, you could walk now towards what they call the resident cafe and so on and so forth.
Right.
It was a huge raku. Yes, he was a sculptor and a ceramicist. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I didn't know about the ceramics part, but I saw him do a firing of a lost wax process with molten aluminum one of his globe pieces.
Yeah, we did it with styrofoam, believe it or not.
Really?
So styrofoam was the matrix. I forget the term. So we had to put the sprues in and the whole 9 yards. And by that time, the sculpture department had moved over to Group 2, which is a science and engineering building. And there was a look back. It was February, and we had the crucible with molten aluminum and pouring it into the mold.
Wow.
But one drop of that aluminum hit the deck, the cement deck, and it had to be below zero when we were pouring. So that heat versus that cold, it blew a chunk of concrete.
Wow.
Killed her, burned it. Yeah.
But I think that event took place in pretty much the same spot you're talking about, where he dug a hole in the ground and poured this all in, and out came this amazing piece of sculpture. But also at that time when I was in graduate school, Bucky Fuller did an event in New York where it was called Making the World Work for Everyone. And he did it along with Werner Erhard, who was founder of AST and the what's now called the Forum, what's evolved into something called the Forum. And I was a bit of a seminar junkie somewhere along the way. And so I went to hear Bucky Fuller, and in fact, George Miller had mentioned him. And I went to this lecture, and when I came back, I talked to George Miller and my fellow graduate students, we were a small group, maybe 8 people, about what Bucky was promoting. And we decided to do an event on campus. We did a spring peepers event. These little frogs.
I used to hear them on my way when I was teaching classes at night. Coming home especially, it was very, very comforting walking down, the path to the parking lots. For some wacko reason, it's a pleasant memory.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, and the sound is wonderful. So we piped in the sound of Peepers music. Meanwhile, we had painted a banner, and because we were all artists, who's going to design the banner? We have to paint it and get it up and all that. So I actually asked George Miller if he would design it, and we would paint it and just get it up. So we got it up, and crazy thing that happened was it was a hit. Everybody loved it. Somebody stole the banner. So anyway, I think I have the original sketch that we did the banner from, and I'm sorry, I got kind of distracted there. But anyway, it was kind of a little bit of Larry Burgess kicking in there, the influence.
Well, it's funny. It's Larry Burgess's influence was a lot better because we had, was it through the auspices of George as well? It may have been, because George is so far beyond me conceptually. I hadn't yet matured to a conceptual level. It's like the 12-step program. He was one of the individuals I wanted to go back and beg forgiveness for, or ask forgiveness for, from. But he brought in Willoughby Sharp, who was the father of kinetic art. Okay. And they brought in these industrial washers or dryers. I mean, massive machines.
Right.
And Willoughby got dressed up in a diaper and had a baby bottle, and he went into the dryer or washing machine. It was like one of those front-loading guys. So it was a pretty good-sized window that you could see. And he would rock back and forth, screaming, "Willoughby, Willoughby," because his father was also called Willoughby. And we're all sitting there going, "Oh my God, I'll never get back this time in my life." Yeah, we just didn't get it, and I still don't. But oddly enough, I go to the University of Miami, and my studio, my first year studio, was shared with another individual. He was, I was like, oh my God. He was like a rocker, biker, he was all these things. It was like all these things that he wasn't easy to cuddle up to. Let's put it that way, But then in an anteroom, there was a woman named Peggy Gage. Now, other than her family being the Gages of Virginia, I mean, it goes all the way back to, like day one and such.
Mayflower.
She ticked off her family by doing a spread, I guess you'd want to call it, in Playboy. So now I'm newly married, and all the guys are like, "Oh my God, you're all nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and all that other stuff." She was the sweetest person in the entire world. We talked about the whole Playboy thing, and she said it was, in some ways, the best thing she ever did, and one of the worst things she ever did. And so now all of her artwork fixated on her body. She'd do these little sketches and drawings. They were beautiful. Really quickly, department chair came into the studio and said, "Hey, channel whatever it is, 6. They need somebody to do a sketch from a witness." And Peggy and I are looking at each other, and it's like, "Yeah, somebody saw a skunk ape." I had no idea what the hell a skunk ape was. I wasn't from Florida. And I could see Peggy's eyes, and it's like, "Go for it, Peggy," right? Well, that launched her career as the premier courtroom sketch artist in the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But
wow.
She, again, came from a very affluent family. She had a penthouse on Key Biscayne or whatever it was. She invited my ex-wife and I over, and who of all people are at this party? Willoughby Sharp.
Oh my goodness.
Who's us chasing my ex-wife around with a strawberry because he said her lips were just like the strawberry and he wanted to do
oh my goodness.
Oh my God. So yeah, so much for conceptualization, right?
Wow.
Anyway.
That's a different kind of concept.
Oh yeah, it is. Let me ask you a question. We've got, we're about 3/4 of the way through.
Okay.
Your time at SMU, UMass is overlapped. It's gone, beyond mine.
I graduated my second B.F.A. in 1975 in art ed.
Okay.
And you graduated in 75, right?
Yeah, I graduated in 75. Yeah. Okay. Have you gone back since?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Going back to art ed, so you had Peter London, which is a whole nother story for another time.
Oh, absolutely. Peter London, Lita Catan,
Yeah.
It was,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Okay. And then you have to deal with Mrs. Desjardins to get your blue card, the teacher certification, which that's a whole other story again as well. The vibrancy, I think I discussed this with Richard. The vibrancy of that campus
uh-huh.
was so phenomenal. Now, maybe because I was just a wide-eyed kid out of high school, I'd never experienced these kinds of things. But then again, I mean, I lived in New York. I lived, the hoity-toity part of, in the East Side,
Uh-huh.
Central Park Gate, and then we moved on down to the West Side to Columbus Avenue. So I was that wide-eyed. But there was a vibrancy there that was unbelievable. They had the opera department, the theater department, the Eistefids, the Kayleys. I mean, it was a phenomenal center. I mean, for because we all have a tendency of putting down this area as we were growing up, but it was phenomenally vibrant for a place that was supposedly nowhere. So do you notice a difference? Did you feel the same thing about the vibrancy?
While I was there?
Yeah.
As opposed to how it is now? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean about that, because I haven't really been there in a little bit.
Okay.
I've been in Florida more or less for the last 4.5 years.
Okay.
I also was out of the area a bit before that. I was in California from 86 to 94.
Okay.
I was gallery director, art consultant. And when I came back from LA, I wrote a proposal for a project that didn't happen. Which reminds me, I forgot to mention, there was a playground that I designed when I was artist in residence in Fairhaven at Livesey Park that got torn down eventually. But the proposal I wrote in 97 was called The Stand for Art, and it was about New Bedford. It was about the art community in New Bedford. In fact, another thing I forgot to mention is that Peggy Call and I had written in our proposal something to do with organizing artists in 71. We had a meeting. We called a meeting of all the artists we could find at the time. I wish I could tell you who was there. But anyway, going back to 97, it was, the arts, I don't know if it's the Arts Lottery. It's not the Arts Lottery anymore, but the Arts Council, where you can write a proposal for. In fact, I was on the committee in Mattapoisett years later. But anyway, my proposal was to do an easel on top of the Star Store building. Or I had also talked to the gentleman who owned 1 Elm Street at the bottom, across from the Standard Times, about that building. But I needed a building that wasn't too high, preferably a shorter building like the Art Museum would have been the right height, but a maybe 20-foot tall easel with a painting on it, like an 8x8 or 12x12 painting. Whether it's a painting of someone like David Smith or a painting of an abstract painting or, what have you. And I saw it as a symbol, like the Eiffel Tower, but, some kind of nonverbal symbol. It's not a billboard. It's a piece of art, and it's a symbol that means art. And it's something that would really declare New Bedford as an art city. And it seems to be going in that direction. But the easel never,
Yeah, I mean, there were times, it's weird because the vibrancy was, that I speak about at SMU, and then obviously you experienced it at Swain. as the other Swaineys. There was a whole different vibe there.
Right.
Don Wilkinson, and I have had these conversations. It was I especially, it was important in my undergraduate year, my graduate years at the University of Miami. I would watch a MASH episode and I would equate the experience to like being in the MASH unit, where these were people like being in the MASH unit. These are people from all over the country that you're thrown together for in this case, it's not to repair wounded or dying soldiers, but it's to create a portfolio, create a thesis for your graduate show. And the camaraderie. I mean, we spent 8 to 12 hours a day with each other. And as Don said, some of the friendships that were made at the Swain School have continued almost unabated all these years. And there's something really, really to be said about that camaraderie, that sense of community, that. So now we have these two areas of vibrancy, and unfortunately, it didn't seem to spill over into the streets because there was very little going on. Art was only seemed to be revered or taken seriously by the artists or those involved in the practice of teaching art, but it was a mill town, so don't have time for that stuff. What do you want to do that stuff for? You got to make a living. Yeah, blah,
right.
blah.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Wow. Yes. So I'm surprised though that the energy is waning rather than expanding at UMass as far as the art department.
I mean, they may argue with us, but then again, they've had 5 deans in a short period of time. There's still the bone of contention is Swain. I've had several discussions with a couple of the deans, also with a couple of the people in grants and acquisitions or whatever they're called, and they just don't get it. They just don't get it. And I've also had conversations with Swain alum. I'm an SMU alum. We are both children of the same father. We are children of Hans Hofmann.
Right.
Because our instructor of note was Ed Tornieri, who was also a student of Hofmann. He was also an instructor at Swain, and I believe for a short period of time may have been an interim president. I would love to find out the story about how he was lured away from Swain to SMU or SMTI.
Which one, Togneri?
Togneri, yeah.
His daughter went to high school.
Heidi Heather, what's her name?
Christina Togneri.
It's Christina. I was totally off her name. I've never. I thought it was Heidi or something. Yeah, I'd love to be able to speak with her because when we graduated, you and I, there was no CVPA. It was the art department. There wasn't even a college of any sort. And anyway, so when it changed over to UMass, that was as much of the same feeling that you get as a kid whose parents get divorced and mom gets a new name.
Right.
And so we are affected by that as well. Our identity is not University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. Our identity is Southeastern Massachusetts University.
Right. Except for me, I went back for graduate school and then it had changed. So
yeah, exactly. So there's something to be said about that. It's not about, somebody said, stop the whining. They got to stop the whining, put on their big boy pants and that sort of thing. And it's like, and this was on a personal notes side, not to be published kind of thing, who said it. And there've been several people actually said it. And it's like, no, you just don't get it. There's something there that is greater. The collective is greater than the individual.
So
So that's what was important. We're going to start to wrap this up, and so
Okay.
I want to ask you, of all the things that you've done,
Hmm.
what is the thing that you are the proudest of, and that you think is going to have the longest lasting impression, or is going to be the most resilient to time? I've never asked anybody else that question.
Right. That's a
I don't
great
know why, it
question.
just popped in my head.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, here I was just thinking I really haven't talked about my art very much, so I hope that my art
Well, it's
survives.
almost impossible to do this in this time frame. That's why I tell everybody it's not a one and done.
Hmm.
You know, you'll have that opportunity to reminisce about Swain, and I have to talk about the interviewing former Swain people now that Dawn is going to be doing it, because I don't want it to become a turf war.
Oh,
You know?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
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 No, well, it's wonderful what you're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, of all the things that I've done,
Mhm.
having a child, having two granddaughters, of course, comes first. But hmm, I guess I hope it would be my work. I hope, this work I've been doing my whole life has a future, and that it finds its way out there, kind of like the balloons or the bottles in the sea, that they drift off and find a home. In fact, I got a contact from an old Swain student who bought a piece of art for his son's graduation from college, for me, and it just it's always a thrill when somebody loves something that you've worked so hard
Mhm.
and spent your life learning about, and shares the ownership of it. So the art, I guess.
Uh, and from an outsider's point of view,
Mhm.
um, from somebody who's only met you formally,
Right.
informally.
We haven't met
I
live.
guess if we're going to call Zoom and this kind of technology informal, formal, whatever, because there's nothing like the real thing in person. But to me, and this is not a judgment or anything, but part of the conversation. Um, your influences as an influencer,
Oh,
if that makes any sense.
like,
I mean, there are people who can do their artwork all the time, stay isolated in the studio, and that term is used quite a bit. But you're in your studio and you're cranking out your work and so on and so forth, and it may touch some people's souls. It may you may get attention and so on and so forth. But what goes on outside the studio? Because having this conversation with you has been very enlightening to me, because I'm now thinking about the people that we've gotten to know in art history were those who accomplished something outside of their studio.
oh,
I mean, think of Claude Monet
right.
and his gardens. He was an incredible landscape artist. And that is a testament to his work.
Right.
He did not exist in another orb, in another sphere, in another dimension.
He was an incredible landscape artist as well as a landscaper.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And and landscapist, or whatever you want to call it. So he created his own environment. With what you did for the Kempton Street riot and a couple of these other concepts that you've had, it's bringing. I mean, imagine you come up with this concept and they say, no, you can't do it because we personally or neighbors, residents, brethren, brothers do it.
Uh-huh.
You could have just said, "Ungats, bye-bye, see you later." Okay?
Right.
But no, because the concept still was valid. In fact, it probably became much more valid
That I didn't paint it.
Well, it was like stone soup.
Uh-huh.
You had this concept, you drag out the pot and then you fill it with water and then you start throwing stones in it.
Uh-huh.
People are like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm making stone. That's not how you do stone soup. You need carrots.
Right.
So it's about a sense of community. It seems like nearly everything that you've done has had. And it's really, really interesting that you and Richard, because when you're talking about, the model cities,
Mm-hmm.
my first thought was, gee, I wonder if that's where, she bumped into Richard or had some influence by Richard or whatever, because I didn't know the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of interesting how the two of you have this overview of things. I'd love to have Richard to come back and speak more. I mean, I presented his idea of the charrette and the artist charrette.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Because it is... it's more than just the individual. It's the artists in community. So it's more than the artists in practice. It's the artists in community in practice.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I get that.
Yeah. And you know what, too? I tell everybody, I'm the luckiest SOB on the face of the earth to be able to speak to all these different artists, because the stimulation that I get, cerebral stimulation, and because of my, mental makeup and my personality and stuff. I mean, my brain is like running in 17 different directions by the stimulus that you've presented. So this has been very, very, very good. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
What's next?
That's a good question. Well, more painting. When you move from place to place, your work changes sometimes. I mean, some artists are fiercely protective of not changing their work when they move. And there's that part of me too. I do a lot of images of organic things like leaves and trees and such. So whether, if there's still leaves, if they're a palm tree or a maple tree or what have you. Mm-hmm. But, putting my thoughts together for the interview had me kind of review some of the things that I've done and kind of open some ideas as far as what might be next. And, as you mentioned, Richard and I have some similar experiences or not experiences exactly, but there's something. Mm-hmm. And we have talked about collaborating on this or that.
Yeah, you guys are not ground level. Well, you are, but you're more so from above. You have a wide picture of mm-hmm. what's going on.
Yeah, so Richard's very visionary.
Yeah, the whole thing. And then when you come down to the ground level, that's when all the parts and pieces are evaluated and such. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So who knows? Who knows?
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this out, take us out, as they say. Hi, this is Ron Fortier. Thanking you for joining us and with our guest, Carolyn Walega. And thanks for listening to the In Focus podcast, brought to you by our sponsor, Heavenly Spirits, who happens to be headed by Dan Cooney, another Swain graduate. And things are happening. Hopefully they're going to get back to normal. But regardless, just be kind to everybody. Be kind to yourself. Thanks so much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.